Good evening and welcome to Northern Hills Federal Credit Union's presentation on budgeting. Feel free to ask questions or submit them using the chat feature in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. I would like to introduce our guest speaker this evening, Laura Prosser. Laura is the Assistant Professor in Accounting at Black Hills State University and is currently serving as the Interim Dean of the School of Business there. She has a master's in business administration, is a certified public accountant, and a certified management accountant. Laura also serves on the credit union's board of directors. I have had the privilege of knowing and working with Laura through the credit union for the past 6 years. Welcome, Laura. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Marty, for that nice introduction. Well, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the basics and benefits of budgeting. And in just a moment, I'll share my screen with you and we'll start going through things. What I'd like to cover tonight is really how easy and simple it is to implement a budget and talk a little bit about some ways that a budget can help you stretch your money and make it go a little further, which is something we'd all like to have happen. And then we want to talk about how a budget can aid in achieving our financial goals and reducing some financial stress. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll get started.
Looks good.
All right, good deal. So I'd like to start by kind of going back a little bit. This past weekend was the anniversary of the big snowstorm Atlas that many of us remember. And that storm caused a lot of financial issues for really everyone in this Western South Dakota area in some way, shape, or form. More recently, March of 2020 brought us to the COVID situation and the global pandemic, and kind of felt like the sign here, the world is temporarily closed. And I kind of want to go back and talk to you a little bit about, just kind of give you a scenario here. In March of 2020, I was happily getting ready to go on a little spring break trip and talking to my students a little bit about, as I left on that Friday afternoon before our week of spring break, that I was headed to Detroit to see my son. And we'd heard a little bit about this COVID virus going around, but not a whole lot. And I was joking that, well, going to Detroit was more dangerous than this virus. Little did I know what was going to happen after that. And throughout this week of spring break, how things changed, and we ended up not going on our trip. And what we thought was going to be like a week off of school, to let everything kind of settle down, ended up being a semester. And really everything closed. And it started to be a little scary because while I still had my job, I was lucky enough to be able to be teaching online. And everything was a little different, but I was able to use this platform of Zoom and switch things to an online format. Others were not so fortunate. My husband is an optometrist who owns his own business and employs several other employees. And he had to close his office to just emergencies. So we got a little worried about what are we going to do? He has several employees relying on him for their income. And of course, that's a good chunk of our income. So what I did was I turned to my budget to kind of figure out what we were going to need to do. And I'm thinking, well, I don't have 6 months of income in savings. But then I realized I don't need 6 months of income. I need 3 to 6 months of expenses. So my budget provided me with a sense of security in this time when everything was topsy-turvy. I was able to look at it and go in and figure out places where we could save some money, expenses that we could reduce. And it just gave me a sense of security that we were going to be able to make it through at least a few months without having things collapse all around me. So I kind of wanted to share that example because a budget can be a source of help, a source of comfort. And it doesn't have to be when the world is temporarily closing. It can be for a positive event like the birth of a baby, when everything changes. So I want to talk about a few things to help us understand how to budget and look at the benefits of budgeting. So we're going to talk about 5 budgeting basics. We're going to be looking at, whoops, I wanted to keep that on that slide for just a moment longer, guys. Sorry. We want to talk about setting goals. We want to talk about planning our budget, implementing the budget, evaluating our results, and strategies to try to improve. So those are the things that we want to talk about this evening. So let's start by asking a question. How many of you have a budget? If you've already got a budget, that's awesome. So hopefully we'll talk about some things that will help you to strategize and make your budget better. And if you don't have a budget, maybe we'll give you some tools to help you put a budget in place. So a budget can be as easy as something written down on paper. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be just some paper, some sheets of paper, some ledger paper, just plain computer paper, whatever you have. You could also use an Excel tool. And Excel is what I'm going to show you tonight, but realize you could just as easily put this on paper and keep track of things. One of my students a few years ago was a student who lived off of a very limited income. In fact, he ended up getting a Habitat for Humanity's house along the way, which was pretty exciting. But he came in one day and wanted to show me his budget, and he did it all on paper. And he had this wonderful budget of a very limited income, but he was actually able to do everything he wanted to do. He and his family, he was married and had a small son. And it was just amazing how he took this very, very small amount of money and made it just work. And he was very proud of the fact that he had done that. So a budget can be really in any source. So paper, Excel, an app on your phone. There's several different apps. You may have heard of some things. One of them is called YNAB. There's Mint, Pocket Guard, and I'm not advocating any of those in particular, but the benefit of having an application on your phone is that you can do your budgeting on the go. And many of these phone apps actually tie right to your bank account so that you can actually keep track of things along the way. One of the things that we'll talk about is, do you actively use your budget? Or is it something that, oh, I set up a budget, but then I don't really pay attention to it? And another key thing is, do you review it and make changes? So be thinking about these things as we delve into this a little more. So the first thing you want to do when you start thinking about budgeting is to set your goals. What do you want to do? And I want you to think about goals in terms of 3 categories: short-term, midterm, and long-term. Short-term are things that are like less than a year. For example, these might be, maybe you want to take a really fun 3-day weekend and you know you're going to need $500 to be able to do that. A midterm goal is something 1 to 3 years. Maybe you have a car that's 4 years old and you want to replace it in a couple years. So you want to be thinking about how much you want to save for that down payment for that car, or maybe to pay for the entire purchase. Long-term goals, and I've got a 3 to 10 year time frame on this, but really long-term goals can be anything past that 3-year horizon. You could be thinking about saving up for the purchase of a new home, saving for retirement, various goals, maybe a child's college education, those kinds of things. The key is to write down your goals, figure out what you want to do, and think about, like, if we need that $500 for that weekend vacation and you've got 5 months to save for it, it makes sense to set aside $100 a month. So just some strategies that you kind of have in place as you think about it. And then once we put your budget together, you'll be able to modify and adjust. The important thing of writing these goals down is that by writing them down, it's almost like you make a commitment to yourself. There was a study done a few years ago about retired individuals, and they looked at retired individuals who were really financially secure and really could do anything they wanted. Then they looked at the next category of retired individuals who they, within reason, could do the things they needed to. And then this other group that really, was struggling. And the difference between these is that the ones that were struggling really hadn't set goals for planning for that retirement early enough to be able to make it work. The difference between the top 2 levels was that they both had goals, but that very top one had written them down. And the study was really fascinating in looking at the differences, and that writing them down is very key. So the next thing you want to do as we start to think about our budget is to establish major categories for our budget. Whoops, I did that again. Sorry about that. Go back to this one. So determine these major budget categories. And this is just a sample of what you might be looking at. your mortgage or rent, your loan payments, maybe your car payment or student loan payments, things that you have that are regular recurring amounts. Credit card payments, how much do you want to pay on toward those? Hopefully more than the minimum amount. And we'll talk about some strategies for reducing debt a little later that go along with budgeting. Things like utilities, groceries. It's interesting, as I taught a personal finance class last summer, groceries was the one area that all of my students that I was looking at and working with, it was the one area that they all underestimated. Everybody spent more in the grocery area than what they thought. But it was also an area that with a little planning, they could be more deliberate about and reduce their spending. And then things like medical expenses, insurance, and miscellaneous expenses are things that we have. So what we want to do is we want to set up our budget, and we want to set up targets for each area. So we're going to start with our beginning cash balance, and I'm going to show you an example here in a moment. We'll start with our beginning cash balance, and that part you kind of know what you have on hand right now. Then set up your targets for each of your savings goals, those goals that we just set. Figure out all the categories that we just looked at. Put the money in those categories, and your budget has to balance. If you end up with a big deficit at the end of the month, you got to readjust. And so you're going to calculate that ending cash balance along the way. So let's go ahead, and what I'm going to have to do is stop my share for a moment. And I just want to stop at this point. Are there any questions? Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask about? All right. Well, let's go ahead, and I'm going to show you. Can everybody see my, oops, I know it. Hang on. I did not reshare my screen. Can everybody see my Excel spreadsheet now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is just a sample. This is a very simple budget, but a budget doesn't have to be complex. And I want to show you kind of what we have here. I've got a spot for the beginning cash balance. Got a spot for the income. This is for if there's two people, A and B, or you can have it if you've got more than one source of income. Expenses, got a spot for like mortgage, utilities, car payment, groceries. I just did a very basic budget here. And now groceries, if you kind of look at that category, you'll see that I listed it over here. I've got it set up so I can list the detail because I might buy groceries more than once a month. So I might have several purchases or eating out that goes in that category. So this total is going to move over and total out here when I actually keep track. And then we have our savings, and I just set up 3 goals, and I didn't do an emergency savings, but you could have that. This is just a simple example. But then the ending balance. And so we have our beginning balance, add in the sources of income, subtract the expenses, subtract the savings, and get that ending balance. So I want to show you my second page of my spreadsheet here. So bear with me for a moment, because as I move to this one. Okay, so can you see now, does the budget have numbers in it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what I've done is I've just estimated the amounts. So this is to set up the budget. There's some thoughts out there that some budgeters say you should track all your expenses for a period of time before you actually set up your budget. I'm of the opinion that don't stall, just start, just set it up. You might be wrong, that's okay. It's a plan. It's not etched in stone. It's a plan you can change. And don't worry that this is shown as an Excel spreadsheet. You can do this on paper too, or one of those apps that I mentioned. So the beginning balance is what you have on hand. So you're probably going to know that amount. Then you estimate what the income is for these two. So that adds up to be your total income. The mortgage amount or rent payment is probably a fairly established amount, set amount. Utilities might be a guess, and utilities are going to vary. So, depending on, your electric bill might be higher in the winter and lower in the fall, for example. Your car payment is probably a set amount. Groceries are an estimate. And then I just included savings goals. And obviously there's things that are not included in here, but just to kind of show you how this works. The benefit is that you tailor this to exactly what you want. So you can see that what I've done here is that I started with the $350, $3,500 of income, $3,050 in expenses. I had $700 in savings, and I've got an ending cash balance that I budgeted of $100. So that's my budget set up. You also kind of notice the format. This is my budget column. Then we have the actual column. We're going to show you that in just a moment, where we start actually implementing some expenses. And then we have a variance where we look at the difference between the budget and the actual amount. So does anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. We're going to go back into our PowerPoint here and talk about implementing the budget. So kind of 3 things that you want to do. And these are just super simple. Track your expenses. This means that you do have to track everything you spend. So keep track of, did you buy gas? Did you buy groceries? Did you pay that utility bill? What did you do? And are you guys seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, just to make sure. So track everything you have and put it into your budget. That's where those little apps are handy, because they're tied to every time you use your debit card, for example. The other thing that you want to do is add detail where necessary. Like in your groceries budget, maybe you've got several expenses for that. Make sure you add that detail and show the date that you purchased something, what you spent, because that can be really important for evaluating things later on. And what you're trying to do is determine the actual amounts you're spending on these various items. So let's take a look at what it looks like when we add in the actual amounts. So let's take a look at what we ended up. So we estimated that we'd have $350 on hand, but we actually had $285. And then our income ended up being a little different. And this one ended up being a little less. So the first one was a little more, maybe there was some overtime or something. This one's a little less. So we have the actual amounts. Our mortgage was exactly what we thought. Utilities ended up being just slightly less, so we did a pretty good job there. Car payment was actual. Groceries, you can show the groceries in detail over here. Like if you went to store number 1 and spent $156, looking at my old eyes here, looking at my page here. Whoops. On the 11th, say we spent another $135, and you can see, or $115, you can see how it's adding up down here. And then I can fix it so it goes right into the budget there and add in. So every time I spend more, it's going to, went back to store 1, and it's adding up. And what we're doing is also calculating our ending cash balance along the way. Every time we change something and put it in there, our ending cash balance changes, so we can keep track of that. So maybe we were able to save the $350, save $250, and maybe we were only able to save, say, $45 there. So we've implemented, or what we've done is we've actually tracked our expenses. So we've got the information there. And the next thing we want to do, oops, sorry, mouse on this computer is very sensitive. Go back to our PowerPoint for a moment, and I apologize for the back and forth here, guys. What we're going to do now is evaluate our progress. So we've set up our budget, we've put our expenses in. Now we want to review our results. What we're going to do is compare the budget and the actual numbers and calculate variances. The variances are basically just the budget minus the actual to see how we're different. What you want to do is look at areas that have larger variances and target areas where you can maybe save money or maybe where you didn't do so well. As I mentioned earlier, when I taught my students last summer, their biggest area of surprise was in groceries. It was kind of funny. I'm reading all these end reports, and almost every one of them had an area that said, wow, I didn't know I spent so much on groceries. So you might have one of those kind of aha moments where you're looking at your budget going, wow, I didn't know I spent so much in this particular area. And that's an area where you can start to think about ways to save. When you're deliberate about where you spend your money, it allows you to focus on the areas that where you want to spend and be able to do the things you want to do. Instead of thinking, oh, I don't have enough money to take that extra little trip, you really can if you concentrate on putting your money into the categories and areas that you really are really important to you. So let's take a look at what that budget looks like when it's all completed here. So let's look at when we're evaluating the results. So you can see the variance here. And we had a little less in our beginning cash balance than what we thought we were going to have. Our income, that income was a little higher. So you can see the variance, and it's nothing, it's just the difference between the budget and the actual. So nothing special. This one was a little lower. And so our total income was actually up by $76. If you look at your expenses, the mortgage was the same and the car payment were the same. Utilities, I'd say we did a pretty good job of estimating utilities. We were only $25 different. Groceries, however, we were $134 more. And that's an area that maybe we can look at, and we'll talk about some strategies for trying to reduce that. We can look at our total expenses and see where we're on track. And then we have our savings goals. And for whatever reason, we didn't put as much money into our goal 3 as what we thought we were going to. We were $45 short. Although if we would have gone ahead and put our 100 in, we'd be okay, and we'd end up with $2.37 at the end of the month. That's okay because it's positive. And that's the goal. You've got to make sure that you adjust your budget so you're ending with a positive number. So the budget has to end positive, and of course your actual numbers, you don't want to have a negative balance at the end. So you've got to be careful. And by having this budget, you can track exactly how much cash you have throughout the month and be deliberate about where you're spending it. So do you guys have any questions on how it's a very simple framework for a budget on how it works?
Can you hear me, Laura? Oh, I guess you can see.
Yeah.
You deal mostly with individuals or married couples?
When I'm doing with students, it's actually interesting. It's a little both.
Both.
And so it's, I've had situations where the married couples do it completely together, or where they do it completely separate.
What about I make it, she spends it attitude?
That happens too. And then that's something that it's communication.
It is a family goal and budget. It's very
yes. And what has to happen there is then if they're doing 2 separate budgets, which is okay, because some people, I can use my son and daughter-in-law as an example, they don't actually have a joint checking account.
Mm-hmm.
They each have separate ones, but they communicate, and they know exactly that my son is going to cover this amount, my daughter-in-law is covering this amount, and then they work together to make that.
That's for
yeah,
sure.
but it's communication.
The challenge of only having half of the household interested in setting too many goals is always a tough one, I think.
Yes, exactly. So it's really, and the nice thing about setting up a budget is if you're doing it proactively at the beginning of as you start doing that, you're communicating and talking, and it makes it very obvious that, what each person is contributing and what their responsibilities are. And the idea is to get that conversation going so that you can both be on the same page with that budget. So it's a really good tool to do it in a neutral setting before somebody's stressed and upset about, oh, I'm paying more, or you're paying, that kind of thing. So, yeah. So it can be a wonderful communication tool.
One thing I was
Great
going to bring
question.
up too is if you have a budget set and you have it outlined on a piece of paper or Excel spreadsheet or whatever, say something happens to you, like you do get COVID, you go to the hospital. Your spouse might be able to find that budget and go, oh, okay, I got to pay this and this and this, because it can happen.
Yes,
Yeah,
that is another excellent point. That is a way of documenting that they know exactly what, because too often in couples, one will do all the household bills. The other
Mhm.
one may not really know that we have these things.
Yeah.
And so if something like that does happen,
Mhm.
there's a record and a way to do
Yeah.
that. Excellent point. Yes. Any other thoughts or comments?
2 credit cards that the other party doesn't know exists.
Yes. That, and that might come to light if you did a joint budget. On the other hand, if they're doing kind of, in a situation, they might have a joint budget, they might each have their own budget for their own things. And maybe that's okay if they're contributing enough to the household and it's part of their discretionary funds.
Sure. But if it's the
So-
credit card reaching the budget,
Right, the credit card, and
so to
yes.
speak.
So
Yeah,
good points.
that's
Yes.
hard to change those habits.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Well, I'm going to go back in and we'll talk about finishing off the budget, and then can everybody see my PowerPoint?
Mhm.
Okay. So step 5 then is to, I guess I don't have it on a slide, but it's to set your budget for the next month. So once you've evaluated how you're doing with everything, you can use that. Maybe, like we went over by that $100 for groceries. Let's see what we can do for that next month and establish our budget for the next month. And it's constantly a work in process. We're constantly working to improve. So looking at some strategies then for ways to improve, groceries and eating out. One of the things that's an area, I guess, that I bring this up just because it was interesting to me this summer that was such an area that my students had. That one of the things that several of them mentioned was that they learned to plan for doing a budget, but it also allowed or encouraged them to plan their menus and plan their grocery outings. And one of the overriding things was, if you can stay away from the store, you don't spend as much money. So instead of going to the store like on 3 or 4 times a week, go once a week. And you'll actually spend less money. You'll probably eat healthier. And then when you do want to eat out, it's more of a deliberate eating out. It's something that you want to do and a nicer thing versus, oh, I'm tired and I just want to grab fast food because I don't know what I'm going to prepare and I don't have the groceries. So it's all part of the planning. So it was interesting that when my students talked about this, and I totally got some of these suggestions from what they said, that if they plan their budget, it really encouraged them to plan in other areas. Another strategy, an area, is preventive maintenance. Do not skimp on, do not wait or take out of your budget preventive maintenance. An example would be like an oil change in your car, because that can just have a bad effect later on. So definitely keep those kinds of things in your budget. Budget to do those things that maybe don't happen all the time, but you maybe need to save up and have money for those things. Simple ways just to save money in other areas. Adjust your thermostat. Right now, it's hard to think about cold weather when it was 90 degrees today. But in the winter, adjust that thermostat down 3 to 5 degrees. Wear a sweater, and you'll save a lot of money. Simply unplugging stuff will save electricity. And paying extra on loans. And we're going to talk about some strategies for that in just a little bit. So these are just some of the strategies that, as you look at your budget and plan for the next period, think about things you can do. If you can save a few pennies here or there, those pennies add up. And they give you the benefit of having and being able to improve your budget and your finances. So I guess I did have a slide for this part, sorry. Set up your budget for the next month. Use those strategies and set your budget for the next month. So at this point, I'd like to move into talking about one of the other things. We've talked about setting up our budget and planning that, but I want to talk about just a few things to help use that budget to help reduce some financial stress. So we're going to talk about kind of 4 things here. Reduce and pay off debt. Your budget can help you do that. Establish emergency savings. Your budget can help you do that too. Save for larger purchases. And surprise, surprise, your budget can help you do this as well. And then the last one isn't necessarily your budget, but a strategy is to not have a debit card for your savings account. So let's take a look at some of these a little more individually. And when we talk about reducing and paying off debt, sometimes those, like Tim mentioned, those credit cards can be dangerous. They're a wonderful thing. They're great for emergencies, but you don't want to be in a situation where you rely on them. So reducing and paying off debt really does help with financial stress. So we have kind of two methods or two schools of thought on how to do this. We have the snowball method and the high interest method. The snowball method, if you guys think about making snowballs, and I know it's hard to imagine when it was 90 degrees today, but a snowball starts as just a little bit of snow, and you start rolling that snowball and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So the snowball method is you want to take your smallest loan. So let's say you have a $500 loan and you're making $50 a month payments on that. So you go ahead and get that $500 loan paid off. Now you can take that $50 payment and apply it on toward maybe your next loan is $1,000. And maybe you were making $100 payments on that. Well, now you can take the 50 from your first loan and the 100 from the second loan and now make $150 payments and get that next loan paid off. Then go to the next biggest loan and add those amounts together. And it's amazing how kind of fun it is to see that those balances going down, and how rewarding it is and how good it feels to get that debt paid off. Another school of thought says to go to your highest interest debt, the one that has the highest interest rate, and start paying that one off, because you'll save so much in interest by getting that one paid off fast. So it doesn't matter which method you use, just have a strategy. And just like you wrote down your goals at the beginning for your savings and your spending plans, write down your plan. Part of your goals are things to reduce and pay off your debt. Those should be included in those goals. So goals aren't always just about how much to save. They're about how to strategize the best use of your money. Emergency savings. I mentioned this in my introduction, that I was kind of panicked at the beginning of COVID there because I didn't have 3 to 6 months of income in emergency savings. But once I sat down and looked at it, I realized I only needed 3 to 6 months of expenses. And I'm happy to say that I've got that now. Actually, I'm striving to have 3 to 6 months of total income in savings. But it was something that was very eye-opening to me, and I've been budgeting for a long time. Realize that we're talking about necessities, not necessarily all expenses. And you want to have this emergency savings in something that is accessible, but not too accessible. So you want to be able to get at it if you need it, but you don't want to be able to get at it if you're just tired on a Friday night and decide that you really want to go buy a new outfit and go out to eat. You should budget for those things. And you should budget for some fun money as well, but you shouldn't take that out of your emergency savings. So you don't want to be able to maybe get at it on that Friday night when you're tempted to do that. You want to make sure that you save for larger purchases. Save for the amount of money that you want to have for a down payment. Or maybe you want to save up so much that you don't even need financing, or that you can do minimal financing and reduce your payments. That's where you want to have a vision of what you want to do for those larger purchases and have that goal of setting that money aside. One of my daughters was a saver from the very beginning, and she has taken that savings mode into her adulthood. And she's just always had that vision of saving up for something bigger. And then when she gets to that point, it's really rewarding to be able to actually buy that purchase. So putting that in writing, putting it in your budget, and having a plan helps you to be sure and be prepared for those larger purchases. And then the last tip that I have in this area is don't have a debit card for your savings account. And I know that maybe goes against our credit union thoughts, but the idea for your savings is you want to make it harder to access, but easy to keep your savings intact. So you don't want to have it so you can easily take that money out. Make it so you could make it so it's easy to put in, and keep it so that it grows and works for you. So you have that savings and have that available. So really kind of to bring things all together, budgets, hopefully you've seen that they're easy to set up and use. We gave you just a really simple example. I didn't want to have lots of detail in there because I wanted you to see how easy it is to set up and use a budget. You tailor that budget to whatever works for you. Budgets take those limited resources and put them to their best use. By laying everything out in your budget, you can see clearly what your expenses are, what your play money been used for, where your money's coming in and where it's going. It also allows you to track your progress on toward your goals. You could set up a separate piece of paper to show your savings or show your progress, Excel spreadsheet or a piece of paper, to show your progress on savings, to show your progress on paying down debt. By having that budget, if you've got that unexpected event that happens, somebody gets sick, or you have something positive like this birth of this new child, or maybe you won that $700 million lottery that somebody won over the weekend, your budget can be helpful for that too. So a budget helps you prepare for those unexpected events and can really help reduce that financial stress because you know exactly how much money you have going in, exactly how much is going out. One of the most rewarding things that for me was after teaching my class this summer, and one of my students came up to me in September and said, I had planned to pay off my truck in a year, but because of doing my budget in June and July, he actually had it paid off already by September because he said he saw so many places where he could save money and where he wasn't spending money effectively. And it is about not spending. It's about spending it for the things you want. So that is my presentation. I am open to questions, discussion, any ideas that you guys would like to talk about.
One thing that helped me, and I still do it to this day, is I take cash only to the grocery store. So if I have to spend just the cash in my hand or less, I don't spend any more than that.
That is a great strategy. It's kind of called, there's a budget method called the envelope method, where you put a certain amount in the envelope. I actually use that when we go on vacation. I try not to use debit or credit cards when we go on vacation, because my thought is that I can see that cash going down and know what I'm spending. And when that envelope's empty, it's empty.
Yeah.
The other part, excuse me, is if and I keep it in separate places, but if my cash gets stolen, yeah, it stinks, but it's just that amount. They don't have my debit card. They don't have my credit card. I didn't lose anything else. I lost that amount of cash. So that I love that strategy, Marty. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Also, I want to put a little plug in too for Money Map on our app and our online banking, because it does have a budgeting tool as well on there. So our members could use that too to track their expenses and see their little bubbles with where they're spending their money and everything. So
my students really liked using apps, and it was interesting that because those apps are really easy, when you do buy something, it automatically goes and shows it updates everything right away. And it was interesting to see how many of them used an app, but also a spreadsheet or a paper model, so they could get this big picture of where they were. Kind of did in conjunction with that.
Yep.
And what's cool about once you start budgeting is you can take just an example and then you tailor it to what works for you and make it be personalized to your situation. So, yeah. Any other comments, thoughts?
I would just add, one thing that I think I saw more people with an aha moment, of, hey, yeah, it is individuals, there's no cap, everyone's situation is totally different, but a lot of budgets struggle when I have payment A, payment B, payment C, payment D, and my paycheck comes and it's gone, all of those payments. And when all of a sudden they can see, hey, getting out of debt, getting debt paid down, hey, that $450 payment, when that's gone, the difference that gives me to be able to save and make changes to my budget. You know, if you can't see changes, ways to evaluate and make those changes, to me, that's makes a big difference and people get more optimistic.
Exactly. Exactly.
Some people just live for payments though, too. I'm convinced of that. You know,
That's very true. That's why I kind of advocate like that snowball method of paying off debt,
exactly. Yep.
because even though you might not hit the highest interest rate, you see the progress
Have
and it just
success.
feels good to get
Wonderful.
that even a small one paid off.
Draw that line through it. I always
Yes.
did that and it felt so good. Oh, that one's done. You could move the next one. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you make even faster progress on the next one because you added that other payment to it.
Right.
So, and that's my favorite strategy. But so, yeah. These
Yeah, I
are
have
these
one.
are go ahead, Tim.
I don't know who told me this, but it was kind of humorous, but kind of one of those, you can envision this happening. You're sick of your credit cards. You want to get rid of them. You want to end it. You're going to really focus. That's one of my goals. Get rid of credit card debt, but don't cut your card up. Put it in a Dixie cup full of water, put it in the freezer, and you've put your card on ice.
Literally. Uh-huh.
Literally. But then if there is an emergency, you still, you can thaw it out and you still have a card, for an
Right.
emergency. Someone
Right.
told me, I thought that was kind of a clever approach where people could see that really working.
Yeah.
Put
There's
it
all
on.
kinds of, it's a great strategy. There's all kinds of little, tips and tricks like that are really kind of fun. Someone told me one time, just a savings trick of save every $5 bill you get. And don't spend them, just stash them away.
Mhm.
And it's amazing. I literally paid for one of our little trips by just saving $5 bills. And it was amazing how fast they added up. So different things that would just consciously do, if you think about to do, that help you be more responsible with funds. So, yeah. Any other last thoughts? Well, I really appreciate having this opportunity to visit with everybody. These are simple strategies, but they're by doing a budget, you can really work to deliberately place your money where it needs to go and achieve that financial success and reduce the stress and be just a lot more secure and happy in what you're doing. So
I
thanks,
appreciate
guys.
you taking the time too to do this presentation for us, Laura.
Yeah,
It was very
you're
good
welcome.
information.
Thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right,
Thank
you
you.
guys have a great evening.
Yes, you too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.